So this is one of two presentations, this today and next week, about Greek philosophy. Today I will be a little bit very disorganized. Next time will be more technical. This time I just kind of browsed on certain topics that came to my mind related to Catholic theology. Okay? Analogy, matter and form, and the Logos. Of course, I'm quoting Pope Benedict XVI, who has been called the Pope of the Logos. Okay. So I put some little figures. The lion is the king of the jungle. You know, that's a metaphor, obviously. It's not an analogy. An analogy is, suppose that a king in Spain sends some emissary because he gives permission, documents, so the emissary will be the real king of the jungle. There's a relationship of causality between the king that sends this emissary. So you can say that this emissary is the king of the jungle. By representation, he has the power to do so. King of the jungle, the lion is not. It's a metaphor. So it's the difference between a metaphor and an analogy. An analogy implies a causal relationship. Okay? Let me quote some very well-known analogies. For example, in Gaudium and Lumen Gentium, they have this comparison. Just as in the Gospel, St. Peter and the other apostles constitute one apostolic college, so in a similar way, the Roman Pontiff, the actual Roman Pontiff, the successor of Peter, and the bishops, the successors of the apostles, are joined together. So it's a comparison, it's not a metaphor, it's a real analogy, because the bishop and the pope today exist because the apostles and St. Peter existed before. So there's a causal relationship. That's typical of a metaphysical analogy. You can put this in mathematical form if you want. You can say that St. Peter is to the apostles more or less as the pope is to the bishops. Okay? It's not an equal sign, it's very important. It's just this 4 does means proportionality. Analogy is proportional, it's not an equality. And it's very important. All the typical analogy is Christ and the church. Ephesians says, for this reason a man will join to his wife and the two will be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I refer it to Christ and his church. So Christ and the church is the analogy, or rather, husband and wife are the analogy of Christ and the church. We have to distinguish in an analogical comparison the superior analogate and the inferior analogate. So obviously, Christ and the church are the superior couple, and husband and wife the inferior. Again, because husband couple are husband and wife because of Christ and the church. They participate in the sacrament created by Christ. So this is a very important analogy, metaphysical analogy. It's not a comparison, neither is complementary. Christ is not complementary to the church. Okay? Christ doesn't need anything from the church. Okay. Abounding a little bit in these types of analogies, and this I invented this a little bit. My brother-in-law Sixto knows all this by memory. Analogy and proportionality, this kind, the other one. I just put this, came to my mind. In causal analogies, the superior analogate causes the inferior. Okay, so there's a causal relationship. In the other type, in participatory analogies, the inferior analogate participates in the superior. For example, Christ's priesthood is fully participated by the Pope and bishops, but is partially participated by the ordained priests and is participated by the lay people in a lower degree. So there's a graduality. It's an analogy. It's not an equality. It's participation that has several degrees. So it's a participatory analogy. That word participation is due to Plato. Plato believed in participation. St. Thomas Aquinas, not too much, and Aristotle said, that's just a myth, participation. What do you mean by participation? But anyway, we use the idea of participation. Luther did not understand these analogies. And that's the problem of Protestantism in general. So Protestants deny not only the ordained priesthood, but also deny the intercession of Mary and of the saints. There's only one Savior by which we are saved, and all the rest are just baloney. We don't need them. So they think that the priest is taken away from Christ, or that the saints are taken away from Christ. They don't understand this participation. It's exactly the opposite. When a saint intercedes for us, he's participating in the power of salvation of Christ. Christ is multiplied, so to speak, when he's participated by his priests, by his saints. This participation, Christ is not like un monopolizador. He doesn't care if other people also have the power that he gave to them. Okay? So it's a brotherhood, it's a participated community. Christ is multiplied in all his priests, in all the Christians, in all the saints that intercede one for another, especially the Virgin Mary. So, the Protestants don't believe in the saints or in praying to the saints. They think we are idolaters. There's only one Christ and one Savior, and that's it. Uniqueness, no participation, no analogy. I have heard that if the concept of analogy were again validated, there will be no Protestantism. If the Protestants understood the causal relationship of analogy and participation, there will be no Protestantism. As simple as that. There's an analogy in Alexandrian Judaism, and I'm going to quote from Fides et Ratio by St. John Paul II. As usual, his language is very dense, sorry, but I have to put it. Yes?
You said that the Protestants understood the...
Okay. This quote is long. I put it in 3 little pieces. The Pope says, in number 19 of Fides et Ratio, the Book of Wisdom contains several important texts which cast further light on this theme. There, the sacred author speaks of God who reveals himself in nature. For the ancients, the study of natural sciences coincided in large part with philosophical learning. More or less. There's a little bit of confusion between science and philosophy, but yes, Aristotle thought that he was doing science in his physics book. He was doing philosophy, but he thought it was physics. Having affirmed that with their intelligence, human beings can know the structure of the world and the activity of the elements, the cycles of the year and the constellations of the stars, the nations of animals and the tempers of the beast, this is in Wisdom 7:17, etc. In a word, that he can philosophize, the sacred text takes a significant step forward. And this is the step. Making his own the thought of Greek philosophy, not the author of Wisdom, is making his own thought the Greek philosophy, to which he seems to refer in the context. The author of Wisdom affirmed that in reasoning about nature, the human being can rise to God. And this is the quote, "From the greatness and beauty of created things comes, by analogy, a corresponding perception of their creator." And the word analogy is, at least in my Bible, and in other Bibles, there's not. And I say, is this the philosophical analogy of Aristotle? I think so, because the Pope is saying this is inherited from Greek philosophy. This is Alexandrian Judaism, Before Christ, this was, in fact, where they translated the Septuagint in Alexandria. And then he finishes saying, this is to recognize as a first stage of divine revelation the marvelous book of nature, which when read with the proper tools of human reason, can lead to knowledge of the Creator. If human beings with their intelligence fail to recognize God as a creator of all, it is not because they lack the means to do so, but because their free will and their sinfulness place an impediment in their way. But look at the specification. The Pope says, if they use their reason to understand nature, it's not only just description, so it has to be a special understanding of nature, in fact, a philosophical understanding of nature. Okay. The opposite or different from analogy is univocity. For example, the concept of animal is applied to cat and also to animal in the same way. So you can say an equality. Animal is to cat as animal is to dog. The genus is the same. So animal in both. The same thing with human. Human is to Richard exactly equal as human is to Peter. We all belong to the same human nature. In an univocal means a single meaning. Analogy has different meanings, different shades of meaning. Mathematical relations are all univocal. 4 is 4, 5 is 5, and there is no analogy. You cannot say more or less 4 and 4 is more or less 7 or 8. No, univocal, clear. And this creates the problem of modern world. Descartes took mathematics as the prototype of truth. The clear, exact, evident ideas of mathematics are for him the touchstone of truth. Very good. He invented analytical geometry, a fabulous invention. In fact, he was very Catholic. He was educated by the Jesuits. He will never move to a place if he was close to a church. He even gave thanks to Our Lady of Loreto for invention of analytical geometry. But his philosophy betrayed him. In fact, he's the father of rationalism, of the modern rationalism. This super Christian Jesuit alumnus, unwillingly created this debacle. Here's where philosophers start going down. There's a book by Maritain called Anti-Modern. Okay. But then let me look ahead of my topic. So, using some of the concepts, matter and form, Aristotle's metaphysics used substance and accidents, and substance has form and matter. And I'm going to go into the technical detail. I'm just using it now. Aristotle originated this concept of matter and form. It's called the hylomorphic composition of all natural beings. Hyle is matter, morphos, form. The hylomorphic composition is very important to me. If only this were introduced into physics, otro gallo cantaría. It would be much better. They are the co-principles of a substance as opposed to these accidents. They are together. And Thomas Aquinas used this concept to understand the transubstantiation, the substance and accident. And last week, Eric showed us some of these procedures, these concepts, and he was kind of rejected. Not rejected, but criticized by the engineers. I don't know. I hope that the engineers were here today. Well, there are some engineers, but I'm talking about, Eduardo said, well, that's all just confusion. We don't need that to believe. We don't need the transubstantiation to believe. Well, that's true, but it helps. And not only that, Eric didn't have time to say, even for human things, that's very convenient to apply this to human reality. Okay. So let's just a little overview of the sacraments. I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's interesting. I found this figure in the internet, the matter and form of the different sacraments, beautiful illustrations, and I don't put here the extreme unction, as they call it. Now it's sacrament of the sick, because I didn't have space. No? There are 7 sacraments, as you know. The holy orders, the oil, I'm not sure, because I have heard of other things. The paten as the matter of the holy orders. And the prayer, of course, is the laying of the hands and then praying about that. But let's not argue about this. In general, there's matter and form in all the sacraments. Wow, you're using Greek concepts for sacramental theology. And I think there's no other way, eh? Believe me, I'm a fan of matter and form composition. So much, the problem is you don't have this. I speak about the contemporary crisis in physics. This book that I have, The Matter Myth, is written by Paul Davies, a man from New Zealand. He was prized. He was awarded with the Temple Foundation Prize. I don't know how. Because to me, this book is plain heresy. It has nothing to do with religion. For example, in one chapter says, in modern physics, abnormal is normal. And there's a chapter called Confessions of a Relativist. He said that reading science fiction novels helped him to understand relativity theory. Wow. What happens, in my opinion, is that contemporary physics is more mathematics than physics. It's more Platonic, Pythagorean, Cartesian. And it's at the same time idealistic and mechanistic, Einstein notwithstanding. For them, time doesn't exist. It's amazing. I just got a book recently, A World Without Time. So this famous concept of space-time, which is to me a nonsensical thing, using that, the world becomes a block universe. Everything happens already. So there's no time for Einstein. A World Without Time is the title of the book. He says that time is persistent illusion. Okay. And there is a danger in Cartesian angelism. I like to quote Maritain in his book, 3 Reformers. Angelism seems to be very nice, but it's not. We are not angels, we are humans. So here's an evaluation of Descartes by Jacques Maritain. In the book, 3 Reformers, Luther, Descartes, and Rousseau. He's going to speak about Descartes And I selected 2 or 3 paragraphs to me are very interesting. He accuses Descartes of the sin of angelism. His univocal, clear, and distinct ideas, as in mathematics, do not require the ministerial function of the physical senses. In this, he departs from St. Thomas and Aristotle. What happens is that, you remember St. Thomas said, non fuerit in intellecto cum prior non fuerit in sensu. There's nothing in the mind that has not been first in the senses. Are we materialists? No. That's the way that we know. From the senses, we have the abstraction process by the active intellect, and then we can think intellectually. But it has to come through the senses. Plato thought differently. Plato thought that our ideas were given from birth. In fact, that we were just remember a previous existence, because they believe in transmigration of the souls, influenced by Pythagoras. So Aristotle said, no, when you are born, you are tabula rasa. You have no idea. You have to develop through your senses everything, and thanks to this fabulous thing called the active intellect, we can abstract and create universal ideas, eternal ideas. Okay, so what happened then, when you renounce to this need of the body to nurture your intellectual life, this is what happened. Then the body is freed from any spiritual function and become only useful for the domination of the material world. The body is the minister. It's like the sacrament. The matter is the ministry of God's grace. Our senses is like a ministry for our rational, spiritual thinking. If you renounce to that, you say, we're not. We're just like angels. Then what are you going to do with your body? The body is going to conquer the earth. It's going to dedicate all his hope and strength for the material world. Descartes says, poor Cartesian angel, angel with iron hands that he prolongs with the innumerable tentacles of mechanics to apply its sovereign action over the entire physical world. Sounds like Pope Francis. These tentacles of mechanics exploit the earth to the extreme, and more than the extreme. So, this denaturalization of human intelligence, man pretending to be like a god, you think he's an angel, is still look at this, what Maritain says in red, is still the secret principle of the dissolution of our culture and the evil of which our faithless Western society wants to die. Wow. So Western people, he says, not faithless, but says, not religious, want to die of this evil, of renouncing to the natural procedure of knowing. You think you are an angel, and you're going to be less than an angel. You're going to be condemned to, to worship the physical world. This is called the Prometheic complex of modern society. You know, Prometheus, that wanted to stole the fire from the gods. Okay, so we have to go back to the Greeks. Now, you go 4 centuries before Christ, the Ionian philosophers. Do you recognize here the 4 elements? Right? You remember the 4 elements? I put a little picture to entertain you a little bit. So, I have the names that I want to test you. A quiz. This one is? Air. No, water. Air is this one. Flunk. This one, earth, and this one, fire. Okay, so those are the 4 elements of the Greeks, of the Ionian Greeks. Are they materialists? No, they just studied the physical world, as the quote from St. Paul says. In other words, this is water, air, earth, and fire, and it has an advantage. These are also the 4 states of matter. Water is liquid, air is gas, earth is solid, and fire is what they call plasma in modern physics, incandescent gases, ionized gases. All stars are plasma. 99.9% of the visible universe is of plasma, is fire. So they were not too far away. Of course, now we have the periodic table of the elements, 103 elements. But the problem is those elements are all in earth, in water, in air, okay? The people discovered these tales, or tales, I hate to say tales of Mileto, said that water is the principle of everything. the arche, because the Greeks were looking for the principle from which everything comes. It's not a purely descriptive thing. It's a philosophical question of the cause. Water. Anaximenes said air. For obvious reason, air is like our breathing, our spirit. Remember that spirit comes from air, from inspired. One time I was looking for the translation of the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost, and it says, el santo alcohol. The holy alcohol. Air solid. Okay, Heraclitus is the one that spoke about fire. Heraclitus was the bad boy of Greek philosophy. He said that everybody was wrong, including Homer. He said that should be thrown out of Greek culture, but he was the first one to talk about the logos. Amazing. Heraclitus is famous for saying that everything changes. Panta rei says that you cannot go into the same river 2 times because the second time is already a different river. So it's the philosophy of permanent change. In addition to fire, fire is just like a symbol of this permanent change. But there were 2 more elements added by Anaximander, the apeiron, and by Aristotle himself, the quintessence, the ether, that was supposed to be filling every empty space, the ether. I believe in the ether, but that's my own conviction. The quinta essentia, the quintessence. In the optimum sphere of the heavens, there's the ether. Okay. Now, this physicalism was actually not because they were materialists. Greek philosophy is like a baby. First, you study the physical world. You say, oh, Daddy, look at the star, look at this, look at that. The young baby or the young kid doesn't have an idea of himself. He says, the baby wants water. Have you heard that? They don't say, I want water. It says, the baby wants water. It's pure objectivity. When they start growing up, then they become more subjective. So the Greek philosophy also passed by this procedure. First, it's all outside, as we already saw. The physicists from Ionia, Thales, Anaximenes, Empedocles, Democritus. I didn't mention before, but obviously Democritus is famous for inventing the theory of atoms. Evolution. Leucippus. Evolution. One of them said that the man comes from the joining of fish organs. Everything is evolution. And atomism is that there are atoms that are constantly colliding without purpose, without design, without cause. Pure causality. So all these ideas that seem so crazy in our modern time, they were already in the Greek culture. One time Fulton Sheen said, every time a modern speaker speaks about something new, he better go and find it in the Greeks. It's already there. Okay. Then that's the first level. Then mathematics, Euclid, Pythagoras, Archimedes, etc. Euclid, the same Euclid that we studied in high school, it's the same book. It's eternal. The same theorem. Do you remember how many inside a triangle, what's the value of all the angles? You remember, Joaquin? How many? Another little quiz. Remember? Anybody remember? Inside a triangle, if you add all the angles, what do you get? 180. That's right. Thank you, Eric. Okay. We learned this in segundo año bachillerato in Cuba. I remember perfectly well. Thales' theorem. Thales' theorem is 2 parallels and a transversal. And there were 8 angles formed, equal to this and that, the alternate interior, actor. It's amazing. We still study that. I tell my students in FIU, this is just 10th grade. They forget the area of a circle, pi r squared. I said, don't you learn this in 10th grade? They say, oh, professor, that was a long time ago. So you already forgot it. Okay. And Archimedes is the engineer. He discovered the law of the lever. You remember his famous phrase? Give me a pivot point and I will move the earth. Okay. I wish Frank and Eduardo were here. An engineer. And then, raising the level again or more, Parmenides, who discovered being. This single little phrase covers everything. There's an American philosopher from Catholic University of 1950. He has a book called Footnotes of the Atom. It has nothing to do with atomic theory. It's just all philosophy, morality, and in the third chapter, it's titled Being Is. He said it takes a whole life to unravel what Parmenides packed in this phrase, being is. It's not a identity only, like a truism. A is A. No. It's a fact. There is existence. It exists. No, something exists. Being is. You remember your Bible? The name that Moses received from God in the burning bush episode. I am one. So, God gave to Moses a revelation to a people that have no idea of philosophy. The Greeks were the ones that were looking for the philosophy things. Isn't that something? Being is. Then came a period of crisis, because between Parmenides being is, he made a mistake. He said there's only one thing, one being. Because if everything is being, there can be no different beings. Everything is being. Whatever is not being is nothing. So it's only one being. And it doesn't move, because moving is part of not being here and there. So he denied the plurality of being, he denied the motion. It's called monism. He had the merit of having discovered being, but he got hypnotized. He didn't progress. He said, it appears that there's many different beings. No, that's just illusion. Don't follow your senses. Typical rationalist. So, Parmenides on one side, and then Heraclitus in the other. Everything changes. So where's the truth? Greek philosophy went from one extreme to the other. So then was a period of crisis, the sophists. People that had a lot of erudition, but didn't search for truth. In fact, they only searched to discuss with the other people, impose their own opinion. They even charged money. They were even experts in the Olympic Games, perfect charlatans. Actually, the word sophistry didn't have that bad connotation. Sophist was a person that looks for knowledge, but now sophistry is just a charlatan. So what happened then? Then came the three great philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. After this crisis of the sophists, of course there were other groups, the Stoics and the hedonists, a lot of things. I'm just simplifying a lot. But Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, especially Socrates, started looking at himself. He started looking at all these things. He questioned all these sophists. Do you know what you're talking about? Can you give me the definition? And they were trapped. So he made ridicule of the sophists, and he paid with his life. Eventually, Socrates was forced to drink the hemlock. It was poison, because he made fun of the sophists by the famous method of the maieutic, right? His mother was a midwife, so he said that everybody knows everything. The only thing you have to ask the question, like bring out the knowledge, okay? Educere in Latin means to bring out. To educate is to bring out. It's not so much to give as to bring out. The teacher is like a midwife, educating. Of course, this had an error, because for the Greeks, especially for Socrates, to know is to remember. Since we had another life before, then we fell into the body is bad, we are like in a prison, so that's why we forgot everything. So when you find something, you are remembering what you already knew from a previous life, you see? But they had the idea of the mortality of the soul. In fact, the pre-existence. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into details of these three great luminaries, because I'm going to leave that for next time. Okay? I'm emphasizing more the theological implications of this Greek philosophy. But I want you to notice the three levels of abstraction: physical, mathematical, and metaphysical. Maritain wrote a fabulous book called The Degrees of Knowledge. From everything down to even to mystic knowledge with St. John of the Cross, passing by theology, everything. It's his Bible. And of course, he defends the idea of the three levels of knowledge, three levels of abstraction. Physical abstraction, mathematical abstraction, and metaphysical. Everything that we think is abstract, even physical things. When you say a horse, that doesn't exist. But you have a black horse, a heavy horse, a white horse. The horse that you speak when you say horse is a universal concept. And how can we attain that universality if we have not seen all the horses? Well, we don't need to. The theory of Aristotle is by looking at the individual cases, we can abstract with this vision of the intellect, agent intellect, to take the essence of the horse. And this is going to be a horrible discussion later in the Middle Ages. Are the universal real things, or just empty voices, flatus vocis, which is the position of the nominalist, or just names, empty words? For St. Thomas, of course, things are like for Aristotle. The concept tells you something of reality. For Plato, the ideas were more real than the things. So when you have an universal idea of horse, there's the ideal horse in some place called the Topos Uranus. He was so idealistic that he thought the ideas had more reality than the things from which you take the ideas. Of course, Aristotle, who was disciple of Plato for 20 years, corrected his master. No, that's not possible. The Christians that first learned from philosophy from Plato, because he went to Europe before Aristotle, you know the story, it goes to St. Augustine, and they liked the idea that the ideas are self-existent. Where? In the mind of God. So everything is like an exemplar idea in the mind of God. So they have a solution for this unsolved problem of Plato. For Aristotle, the idea isn't the thing. Okay, but I don't want to anticipate the problems of medieval philosophy, because I'm just browsing the beginning of these things. 3 levels of abstraction. And, okay. And the motion from external things to human internal value. So after the physicists, then came the moral philosopher like Socrates, and then started looking at himself. In fact, the first phrase of Socrates, know thyself, Pope John Paul II in Fides et Ratio starts with that, know yourself. A life not analyzed is not worth living. Okay, so start looking at yourself, at your moral profile, at your political behavior, artistic, everything that is human, not only the physical world, but without debunking the physical world. Because for Plato, the physical world was a shadow. He created the myth of the cave. We don't do that. Catholic philosophy, thanks to Aristotle and Aquinas, is very realistic. We believe in matter. We don't think that that's just an illusion. So much so that is matter for the sacraments. Okay? I would say, frankly, that the Catholic Church is the leader in defending the reality of matter nowadays. You think that physics don't matter? No. They are mathematicians. The myths matter. How can a physicist write about the myths of matter? We are defending the reality of matter every time we receive a sacrament. And we are defending life, etc., etc. Okay. Then, but the top of this evolution was the Logos. I mean, this is my opinion. And I think Emeritus Pope Benedict XVI will be in agreement. The greatest gift of Greek philosophy to Christianity, the Logos. I was surprised. I didn't know this. Preparing this conference, I learned a lot about Benedict XVI and the Logos. So I put a quote here. Let me see. Logos, of course, means both word and rationality. Okay. Pope Benedict XVI has been called the Pope of the Logos. Christianity, he says, must always remember that it is the religion of the Logos. He said that in April 2005, shortly after being elected Pope. No? St. Paul asks us to render God a logicae latreia, an obsequium rationabile, a rational cult. So we Catholics have to be intelligent, I mean, rational, not stupids. St. Peter also has to be ready to give anybody that has the reason of our hope. This is in 1 Peter. There are different ways of saying this. So here's Benedict Pope 16, the Pope of the Logos. Now, I finalized this with a study of his famous Regensburg conference in Ratisbona, September 2006. The title of this conference was Faith, Reason, and the University. Look at that, Ephraim. That would be perfect for FIU or for any apostolate in the university. Faith, Reason, and the University. Because he went there after being proclaimed Pope, after 45 years of having taught there, it's his same department, so he gave this conference. And he touches important topics. Unfortunately, you know this story, because he mentioned in a dialogue the dialogue between Manuel II Palaiologos and an educated Persian. The person asked the emperor, the Byzantine emperor, what did Muhammad brought to the world? And then Manuel II said, nothing but evil. Can you imagine? He said, for more, it didn't go. You know that the reaction was so bad in the Muslim world that they killed a nun. A nun was killed, reacting to these words of the Pope, which is not his words, it's a quote. Muhammad appears as vilified. The Pope disagrees with that statement, but the Muslim reacted violently, killing a nun. So, as we said this morning, so they prove that they're vilified. They prove that they do what the evil they're accused of. And then the Pope, this is quotes, verbatim. God can never approve evil, much less violence to spread the faith by this. And then there's a website that says, oh, come on, Christians also kill people, the Crusades. And this man starts defending Christian Crusades and the thing that happened in Spain and all the conquests of the Muslims from one end of the world to the other by the sword. Okay. The conviction that this is the Pope, acting unreasonably contradicts God's nature is merely a Greek conviction, or is always an intrinsically truth? You see? Is this a universal thing or only belongs to the Greeks? Because the Greek had Aristotle and Plato, especially Aristotle, a fabulous concept of morality, especially, you know what is politics for? To promote the virtue among the citizens. Because virtue is the only way to be happy. That's the morals, the ethics of Aristotle. When was the last time that you heard a politician in this country say that virtue is the source of happiness instead of money? It's amazing. It was a high-level ethics. And I'm not sanctifying Aristotle, because all the things he was really bad. He thought that women had no soul, and the slaves, something like that. Only slave work. Listen, people. The dignity of the woman is the work of the Catholic Church, of the Christian religion. There's no other way to dignify woman. Okay, anyway, that's a sideline. So he continues saying, the encounter between the Greek Christian message and Greek thought was not by chance but providential. So he quotes here Acts 6, where St. Paul received a request from a Macedonian, please come and help us. Okay, so it was asked, providential, asked by God. And of course, the translation of the Septuagint at Alexandria was such an encounter. He said it was not merely a translation, it was more than that. So why is that the Book of Wisdom speaks about the elements and that through analogy you can know God? As the Pope John Paul said, because we're influenced by the Greek thought, even before Christ. And then he praises the intellectualism of St. Augustine and St. Thomas, but he criticized the voluntarism of Duns Scotus. I don't want to go into these details, but you know that the Augustinians and the Franciscans are more on the way of love, the Dominicans more on the way of intelligence. What is the final happiness in heaven? The beatific vision. For St. Francis or for St. Bonaventure is love of God. And it's nothing contradictory. In fact, St. Paul said that love is beyond knowledge. But Benedict says, but it's always the love of the Logos. He keeps insisting. It's a rational love. Okay. Now, the last part of his conference is this attempt He description of how people try to de-Hellenize Christianity. The Protestants, basically the Protestants. He quotes Luther in the first place. Luther said that philosophy is the devil's war. Wow, that's typical Luther, la prostituta del diablo. The principle of sola scriptura, the Lutheran principle, sought faith in its, this is Benedict talking, sought faith in its pure primordial form as originally found in the biblical word. Metaphysics appeared to them as a premise derived from another source from which faith had to be liberated in order to become once more fully itself. Wow. That's the rationale for the Hellenizing Christianity. And then he even goes to Kant, when Kant stated that he needed to set thinking aside in order to make room for faith. He carried this program forward with a radicalism that the reformers could never have foreseen. So this confirms my suspicion that Kant was the real guy that destroyed philosophy. He destroyed metaphysics. We cannot know things in themselves, only the phenomena, the appearances, the sensible appearances. My comment, number 3, in short, Luther separated faith from reason, and Kant separated reason from reality, from integral reality. That's not my idea. I think Fulton Sheen says something like that. Separation, separation. The second attempt is the Protestant liberal theology. I was really appalled when I read this. Adolf Harnack. Harnack, 19th century liberal theology. The liberal theology of the 19th and 20th centuries ushered in a second stage the process of de-Hellenization with Adolf von Harnack as its outstanding representative. When I was a student, he spoke talking about himself. And in the early years of my teaching, this program was highly influential in Catholic theology too. I don't know if Bishop, Monsignor, if you were exposed to this liberal theology. So it took as its point of departure Pascal's distinction between the God of the philosophers and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know, Pascal said, no, the God of philosophers has nothing to do with the real God. Pascal was like a romantic. He had nice thoughts, eh? Famous pensée of Pascal. La sangre de los mártires, la semilla de los cristianos. Things like that. But he tended to neglect rationality. And he was a physicist. He discovered the principle of pressure, Pascal's principle. He was a mathematician. He invented the adding machine. The second attempt, continuation of the second attempt in the hands of the Protestants. Harnack's central idea was to return simply to the man Jesus and to his simple message, underneath the accretions of theology and indeed of Hellenization. All that is garbage. This simple message was seen as the culmination of the religious development of humanity. Jesus was said to have put an end to worship in favor of morality. In the end, he was presented as the father of a humanitarian moral message. He's a moral reformer, but not a divine person. And this is what happened. Fundamentally, Harnack's goal was to bring Christianity back into harmony with modern reason. Liberating it, that is to say, from seemingly philosophical and theological elements, such as faith in Christ's divinity and the triune God. Oh my God. So that's a philosophical accretion, something to be eliminated, like a parasite. That's what Harnack says. And I put in parentheses, he also rejected miracles, and he rejected the Gospel of John. Of course, John starts, in the beginning was the Logos. How can he accept that? Behind the thinking, this is a very tough reading, but he has such a deep understanding, Pope Benedict. Behind this thinking lies the modern self-limitation of reason, classically expressed in Kant's critiques already, but in the meantime further radicalized by the impact of the natural sciences. This modern concept of reason is based, to put it briefly, on a synthesis between Platonism, Cartesianism, and empiricism, a synthesis confirmed by the success of technology. So, since it works, it must be true. Pure pragmatism. If the engineers were here, well, there are some engineers, right? But they will be flying because The success of technology doesn't guarantee the truth of the physics or the knowledge behind it. That's called scientism. Scientism is a brief word to describe the elevation of science to a super philosophical value. You know, some people think science is the word of truth, but it's not scientifically proven. It's not true. It's garbage. When Benedict was saying this conference in Ratisbon, in Regensburg, he made almost a comic comment. He said, there's some professor here that said that this university has 2 faculties of theology. In fact, 2 faculties to study something that doesn't exist. That's what he said, professor. How come we have 2 faculties to study something that doesn't exist? And he made fun of it, no? Okay, I'm finishing. The third attempt at the enculturation, here's what it gets very conflictive, Joaquin. Because the third attempt to renounce to Greek culture and philosophy, etc., is in the name of enculturation, he says this, I must briefly refer to the third stage of the Hellenization, which is now in progress. In the light of our experience with cultural pluralism, it is often said nowadays that the synthesis with Hellenism achieved in the early church was an initial enculturation which ought not to be binding on other cultures. Because they were Greek and philosophers and Aristotelian, the rest of the community doesn't have to go to that garbage, to put it bluntly. Okay? Why do we have to? And this was a real problem. Some bishops from Asia say, why do we have to study St. Thomas? Why do we have to study Aristotle? We have another culture. In fact, we have even more profound mystical roots in those Oriental continents. Well, the latter are said to have the right to return to the simple message of the New Testament prior to that enculturation, in order to enculturate it anew in their own particular milieu. This thesis is not simply false, but is coarse and lacking in precision. So, think of the Amazonian, Joaquin. And I know opposition, but here's the problem. So, much before that we have all this synod and all this discussion, it was, in fact, Pope John Paul spoke about India. Should the Indians become Thomists and Greeks to be Christians? And he reasons all that, the same thing. The church went to that providential path. We cannot deny it. What God willed providentially has to be there. Everybody has to pass by that track. Okay, why is, he continues, the New Testament was written in Greek and bears the imprint of the Greek spirit, which had already come to maturity as the Old Testament developed. Remember? The book of wisdom before Christ. True, there are elements in the evolution of the early church which do not have to be integrated into all cultures. Nonetheless, the fundamental decisions made about the relationship between faith and the use of human reason are part of the faith itself. They are developments consonant with the nature of faith itself. Imagine, how can you describe the Trinity with the concepts of nature and person? It's impossible. That's it's almost a miracle. Nature is not the same as person. 3 persons and one in one nature. What is nature? That's a Greek concept. Physis, nature. So it's part of our confession of faith. We cannot renounce that on the name that is just culture. Final remarks and conclusions. The intention here, says the Pope, is not one of retrenchment or negative criticism, but a broadening of the concept of reason and its application. While we rejoice in the new possibilities open to humanity by science and the progress, we also see the dangers arising from these possibilities, and we must ask ourselves how we can overcome them. We will succeed in doing so only if reason and faith come together in a new way, if we overcome the self-imposed limitation of reason to the empirically falsified. Oh my God. I mean, he's an expert. What is science? The empirically falsifiable. In fact, that's Popper's philosophy of science. You can never prove a theory right, but you can prove it wrong, empirically. Empiricism is the touchstone of truth in science. Very good. But not only in science. You cannot apply scientific method to non-scientific things. Vincent Edward Smith from Washington University says, you use a hammer to hammer nails, not to hammer your fingers. The same thing with the scientific method. You use the method for sticks and stones, not for human beings. But the danger of applying science to everything has invaded our culture. It's called scientism since the 19th century. I didn't know this in Cuba. I discovered this reading this book by Vincent Edward Smith. He's saying the same thing. The world, now, he's defending now the world religions. So you can think of the Amazonian tradition here. The world's profoundly religious cultures, like the Oriental nations, see the exclusion of the divine from the universality of reason as an attack on their most profound conviction. You know, where he spoke a lot and he described how scientism erases all knowledge of God, no? So the people that receive science in other countries, and they are very happy with scientific progress, at the same time they are selling their soul to the devil because they are renouncing to their deep cultures. You know, Pope Paul VI already said that in Populorum Progresso. The advance of the other countries in technical things doesn't imply that they renounce to their own deep traditions. And that's what happened in the Amazon. But for the sake of technical progress, they're killing you, as Joaquin said one day, but also destroying their reason. However, they have to pass by the path of the church. So it's a combination of things. Okay. A religion which is deaf to the divine and which relegates religion into the realm of subcultures is incapable of entering into dialogue of cultures. This was the topic that John Paul II developed a lot. He believed in the communication of cultures, not in barriers. Cultures doesn't mean that you cannot receive from the other. They're not there. They can be penetrated with the good things of one and the other. Okay. At the same time, as I have attempted to show, modern scientific reason, with its intrinsically Platonic element, bears within itself a question which points beyond itself and beyond the possibilities of its methodology. In other words, he's saying that the very foundation of science cannot explain. It goes beyond. Because he repeats this Platonic element. What is that? Mathematics. You remember that Plato at the end was influenced by Pythagoras, and Pythagorean said everything is a number. Number is everything, mathematics. And that's why mathematics flattens all the philosophical concept. I wish Father Suarez don't hear this, because he's a mathematician, and he told me one time that philosophy confuses everything, so I don't know. I don't know his position. But anyway. So, conclusion. Modern scientific reason quite simply has to accept the rational structure of matter and the correspondence between our spirit and the prevailing rational structure of nature as a given on which its methodology has to be. In other words, they have to accept that matter, nature, is rational, but they don't know why. They cannot answer that question. He said, yet this question, why this has to be so, is a real question, and one which has to be remanded. This word is funny. It's correct, remandar. Send this again to the natural sciences, to other modes and planes of thought. In other words, natural sciences cannot answer this question about the very foundation of their rationality. They have to be held by other approaches, which are obviously philosophy and theology. Then the West has long been endangered by this aversion to the question which underlies its rationality and can only suffer great harm thereby. The courage to engage the whole breadth of reason and not the denial of its grandeur. This is the program with which a theology grounded in biblical faith enters into the debates of our time. This is the end. Then he quotes again Manuel II. Not to act reasonably, not to act with logos is contrary to the nature of God, said Manuel II, according to his Christian understanding of God, in response to his Persian interlocutor. It is to this great logos, to this breadth of reason, that we invite our partners in the dialogue of cultures. To rediscover it constantly is the great task of the university. Wow. Should I say that in FIU? The great task of the university to rediscover constantly the logos, the rationality. Okay. This thing that matter, nature, implies a mathematical order that we don't know why. Why there can be a harmony between our mathematical minds disconnected from reality and reality itself? Some people say, oh, God is a great mathematician. Okay? I have a little example here to finish. The conic sections. I always was impressed by this. Discovered by the Greeks. You know that if you take a cone and you slice it in different ways, you get different curves. If you slice it horizontal, you get a circle. Look from the top. If you slightly incline, you get an ellipse. If you slide it parallel to the generatrix, parallel to the side, you get a parabola. And if you slice it vertically, you get a hyperbola. Amazing. It's called conic sections. Now, these things became phenomena in times of modern physics. They were, so to speak, incarnated into physical phenomena. For example, in my book of astronomy, I have this figure. It's a cannon on the mountain. If you throw a cannonball slow, it will fall. That's a parabola. More speed will go farther. But more speed, it will go beyond the horizon and then describe a circle. Will be in orbit. If you still go farther, then it produces an ellipse. So a parabola is when you drink a drinking fountain, you press, you get water. This is a parabola. Every projectile describes a parabola. I don't know if you can see this one. Yeah. When a baseball throws a ball, this describes a parabola. That was discovered by Galileo before Newton. And the hyperbola is more difficult to find an example. This is a comet. A comet around the sun describes a hyperbola. There's another one. If you throw a particle, positive particle against a positive nucleus, it's rejected. The curve is a hyperbola. So all four conic sections are incarnated, so to speak, in physical phenomena way, way later, centuries way later. How can the human mind have predicted this harmony? So the question of the Pope is, why is that? You have to answer, why is irrationality in nature? Against Democritus has said everything is by chance, there's no purpose, there's no order, there's nothing. And even the modern physicists, people said everything is just chance. It's like quantum mechanics is like a lottery. Everything is just a matter of non-causality, etc. Okay? So